Picture a grand Victorian townhouse, silver-polished bright velvet curtains pulled back to the morning sun, and a fire already glowing in the hearth. The family stepped into the dining room, as though the house had prepared itself overnight. But none of it was magic. Hours before dawn, an unseen hand had scraped out the ashes, carried coal, polished the brass, and boiled the kettles. That hand belonged to a girl of just 14, a maid-of-all-work. She was one of the most invisible figures in 19th-century London. Her life filled with misery, yet hidden behind the glittering walls, the 19th century was an age of invention, empire, and elegance. Steam trains thundered across the land, gas lamps lit London's streets, and parlours sparkled with silver. But beneath the glamour was an invisible army of workers, servants who broke their bodies, so the rich could enjoy comfort. By the mid-1800s, in London alone, more than a quarter of all women worked in service. Many were daughters of farmers, widows, or orphans, anyone desperate for survival. Most were barely teenagers. Unlike hire servants with single roles, the maid-of-all-work did everything: cooking, cleaning, hauling, scrubbing. She was cheap, replaceable, and trapped. Her entire future depended on a single fragile lifeline: her character, a written reference from her employer. Without it, no one would hire her. Her bad mark meant poverty, homelessness, or life on the streets. Her first battle of the day was not with her mistress, but with fire and water. The fireplaces had to be scraped clean before the family stirred. London's air was already heavy with smoke from thousands of chimneys, but she began her work anyway. She cleared out the ashes, carried coal, and rubbed the fireplace until her fingers were raw and bleeding. Buckets of water had to be hauled from the yard. In winter, when the pump froze solid, she chipped the ice apart to fill her buckets, each one weighing over 40 pounds. Her tired arms trembled as she climbed the narrow stairs again and again. One maid remembered, "By sunrise my back ached as though it would break, yet I had scarcely begun." By 6 o'clock she had already done more hard labour than her mistress would all week. And yet the real day hadn't even begun. Now came the chores that kept the household shining. Floors, rugs, windows, like she worked them all. Knees ached on the hard floor, arms shook from beating the rugs, and hands burned from polishing glass until every smudge disappeared. Laundry was perhaps the cruelest task. Clothes boiled in huge copper tubs, stirred with wooden paddles so heavy they left her shoulders raw. Steam filled the room until she choked, while strong soap burned her hands. One servant girl admitted, "My hands were so sore I could not hold my fork at supper." Still, I dared not complain. On wash days she might labour 10 straight hours in that steaming prison, only to be ordered to scrub the floors afterward. Even duties outside offered no escape. She trudged through London's filthy streets, fog thick with smoke, horse droppings covering the roads, and the stink of rotting garbage rising from alleys. Often barefoot to save her shoes, she carried parcels so heavy her shoulders turned purple with bruises. Upstairs the family lounged in cushioned chairs, sipping tea from porcelain cups. Their jewelled gowns brushed clean rugs. Their laughter drifted through the ceilings, while she worked in silence below. Silence was its own kind of torture. She could not speak unless spoken to. She could not sit in her employer's presence. If noticed, she had to lower her eyes as if apologizing for being alive. One Victorian mistress told her maid, "You are to be useful, not visible." Hunger and exhaustion were only part of her suffering. Many maids faced threats that went far deeper than sore muscles. Masters who saw them as easy prey, sons of the house who crept into kitchens after dark. Some girls were assaulted and then thrown out in shame, carrying scars, or children. They never chose. Few believed their stories. Mistresses could be just as harsh. A mist speck of dust, a clumsy button, and punishment came swiftly. Some withheld food. Others dismissed girls on a whim, destroying their reputations with a single word in their character. A newspaper notice from 1856 warned, "Dismissed without character. This is the worst fate for a girl in service." And if she fell ill, there was no sympathy. A cough, a fever, even a sprained wrist could mean the end. Employers simply called the registry office and found a new girl. The sick maid was left on the street, too weak to work but too poor to rest. Her whole survival balanced on one fragile piece of paper, signed by the very people who worked her to the bone. And still the day dragged on. As the wealthy family gathered for dinner, her work only grew. She darted in and out of the dining room, clearing plates, polishing silver until it gleamed in candlelight, washing dishes blackened with soot. Hours later, when the family climbed into feather beds, she remained in the kitchen, wiping surfaces, laying the table for breakfast, and banking fires so the house wouldn't freeze overnight. Only when the last candle died did she creep back to her attic. Her room was bare, a straw mattress, a cracked basin, no fire for warmth. In winter, frost crept across the window pane. Rats scurried in the walls. She fell asleep still in her clothes, too tired to undress, knowing tomorrow would be the same. One maid summed it up simply: "I prayed for Sunday, yet when it came I was too weary to lift my head." This was not a life. It was a sentence. For some maids, the endless grind led to collapse. Exhaustion pushed them into sickness, coughs that turned into fevers, fingers cracked and bleeding from scrubbing floors, backs hunched from years of lifting coal and hauling buckets. Others simply couldn't endure. Some fled in the night, leaving behind their wages and belongings. For many, there was no escape. They were bound by contracts or too poor to risk dismissal, and yet behind the silence anger brewed. Letters, diaries, and court records tell us of women who struck back, answering cruelty with defiance, smashing crockery, or even poisoning the food of masters who tormented them. Though most endured quietly, the breaking point always loomed. It was not just a job. It was a slow destruction of the body, the spirit, and the will to live. Yet not every story ended in despair. Some servants managed to carve out small freedoms within their harsh world. A kind mistress might allow her maid an extra hour to rest, or a footman might sneak leftovers from the dining hall to share. A lucky few even escaped service altogether. They found work in shops, factories, or as seamstresses, trading one hardship for another, but at least reclaiming a measure of independence. For some, marriage was the only way out. Leaving a life of servitude behind meant becoming a wife and mother, hoping never again to scrub another master's floor. These rare escapes offered a glimpse of life beyond servitude, but for the vast majority, the chains of poverty kept them bound to the endless cycle of labor. Victorian society rarely questioned the suffering of servants. The wealthy saw their comfort as natural, their glittering homes as a mark of refinement, yet they never stopped to ask whose hands made it possible. Writers and reformers occasionally raised their voices, warning of the misery hidden within kitchens and sculleries, but most turned a blind eye. Newspapers praised society balls and grand dinners, while ignoring the exhausted girls who polished every spoon and scrubbed every step. For the elite, servants were furniture, useful, silent, and invisible. Even when abuse or cruelty came to light, it was dismissed as part of a servant's duty. And so, while London sparkled under gaslight, the truth remained buried in shadows. This was the hidden reality behind Victorian splendor. Parlors sparkled because young girls' hands bled. Fireplaces blazed because their lungs filled with soot. Grand dinners dazzled because invisible workers broke themselves in silence. The maid-of-all-work was the backbone of Victorian life, yet treated as if she was nothing. Childhood stolen, bodies broken, voices silenced. Without them, the glittering image of Victorian society would have collapsed. As one servant later wrote, "We made their homes shine, yet none saw us. We were nothing, and yet without us everything would fall apart." When we picture Victorian elegance, we must also remember the suffering that made it possible. Behind every chandelier and polished spoon was a girl living in misery, unseen and unheard. If these hidden stories move you, subscribe and join us as we uncover the forgotten lives that history tried to erase. Not the polished version, but the raw reality.